The last copy of Echoes in the Penumbra bore my shaky signature. Daniel, the author, watched me with a half-smile that promised more than gratitude. His gaze, hazel and deep, seemed to read entire chapters in my green eyes. I, Clara, the owner of this modest bookstore, felt an unusual warmth under the shop lights. The event was over, the last admirers dispersing. Daniel approached, his presence filling the small space behind the counter. "Thanks for everything, Clara." His voice was a low, almost intimate whisper. "It's been revealing." Revealing? What could he have discovered behind my facade of a competent bookseller? I offered a professional smile, though inside my pulse was a runaway drum. "The pleasure was mine, your readers were delighted." He nodded, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "I know a place," he said suddenly, "where conversations flow differently. Less formal, more authentic." My heart skipped a beat. An invitation? From him? A place? I repeated, trying to make my voice sound casual. "I've lived with Marcos for 5 years, a comfortable, predictable routine." This, however, was a spark in the monotony, a dangerous and attractive spark. Daniel smiled, conspiratorially. "It's called the Crimson Quill. Not in any tourist guides." He pulled out a nameless card, just a cryptic handwritten address. "If you feel like exploring different echoes than those in my books." His offer hung in the air, laden with possibilities. I took the card, the smooth cardboard under my fingers. "The Crimson Quill," I murmured. It sounded like a secret, forbidden. Just what a part of me, that part lulled by routine with Marcos, secretly craved. "I might drop by," I said, my voice barely a whisper. An hour later, after closing the bookstore and sending a vague text to Marcos about extra work, I found myself in front of an unmarked door in a West Village alley. Nerves, excitement, an intoxicating cocktail bubbled in my veins. This was madness. I knocked softly. The door opened a crack, revealing only a scrutinizing eye. "Yes?" a gruff voice asked. "Daniel invited me," I said, feeling ridiculously clandestine. The eye seemed to assess me for an eternal moment before the door swung fully open. I stepped into a different world. Crimson velvet, lights so low that shapes were barely distinguishable, the murmur of hushed conversations, and the faint clinking of glasses. The air smelled of aged bourbon and something floral, exotic. The Crimson Quill. Definitely not just any bar. And there he was, Daniel, reclining on a wingback sofa in a secluded corner, as if he were the king of that secret place. He saw me and a slow smile spread across his lips. He stood up and came to meet me, his figure silhouetted against the gloom. "Clara," his voice enveloped me like the velvet of the establishment. "I knew you'd come." It wasn't arrogance, but a quiet certainty that made me feel, strangely, welcome and desired. He guided me to the sofa, his hand barely brushing my back. That touch, fleeting as it was, sent an electric current down my spine. We sat, sinking into the softness of the velvet. A waiter appeared out of nowhere, silent and efficient. Daniel ordered for both of us, a cocktail with a suggestive name I didn't catch. "So," he began, his hazel eyes glinting in the darkness, "what echoes are you seeking tonight, Clara?" His question was an invitation to bear more than just my thoughts. I swallowed, the atmosphere conspiring to disarm me. "Perhaps, ones I don't usually hear," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. "Ones that take me off the usual sheet music." Marcos and I had a life like a predictable song, every note in place. What if I wanted an improvisation? Daniel nodded slowly, savoring my words. Improvisation is the soul of jazz, and of other, more intimate arts. His lips curved into a smile that was pure sweet poison. The drinks arrived, steaming and exotic. The first sip was an explosion of unknown flavors, warm and spicy. Like the conversation that was beginning to flow between us. We talked about books, yes, but not like in the bookstore. We talked about the hidden passions of authors, the unsaid desires between the lines. Every writer is a voyeur of the human soul, he said, his knee accidentally brushing mine under the table. And sometimes, the character that intrigues us most is the one who dares to break their own rules. My skin tingled at the contact. I didn't pull my leg away. Why should I? Marcos never brushed my knee like that, with that mix of casualty and deliberation. And what if that character is afraid? I asked, my voice a little breathless. The alcohol or the emotion, I wasn't sure. Fear is just the prelude to courage, Daniel replied, his hand now resting dangerously close to mine on the velvet sofa. Or to a very pleasant surrender. His thumb caressed the back of my hand, a minimal gesture with maximum impact. My breath hitched. Surrender. The word echoed in my head, tempting and forbidden. What would I be surrendering to? To him? To this moment? To a part of myself I had kept locked away? Marcos was security, Daniel was a fascinating abyss. I raised my glass, my fingers trembling slightly. I suppose all characters need a catalyst for their transformation, I said, looking at him over the rim. Someone to show them the door to that. Improvisation. Daniel's smile widened. And sometimes, the door doesn't need to be shown. Sometimes, it simply appears when one is ready to see it. He leaned a little closer to me. I could smell his cologne, a mix of sandalwood and something darker, addictive. Our faces were inches apart. The tension was so thick you could cut it with one of the bar's silver knives. His eyes flickered down to my lips for an instant, then back to mine. A universe of possibilities in that brief detour. And are you ready to see it, Clara? He whispered, his warm breath brushing my cheek. The question wasn't about a physical door. It was about crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. My relationship with Marcos, my orderly life, all in the balance. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining that door. What lay behind it? Pleasure? Guilt? A version of myself I didn't know? I opened my eyes and met his expectant gaze. Perhaps, I replied, my voice barely audible, I always have been. A triumphant spark shone in Daniel's eyes. He said nothing. He simply lifted my hand, the one he had been caressing, and placed a soft kiss on my knuckles. A kiss that burned more than any direct caress. A pact sealed without words. The warmth of his lips spread through my arm, up to my chest, where my heart pounded with a renewed, almost painful force. Was this what it felt like to be truly alive? To flirt with the forbidden, with the promise of an adventure? The bar's music seemed to have intensified, or perhaps it was just the blood roaring in my ears. Every detail of the place had become sharper. The glint of a glass, the shadow of a couple in a corner, the intoxicating aroma of the atmosphere. Daniel leaned back on the sofa again, watching me with an intensity that stripped my soul bare. The best chapters, he said softly, are those written without a prior plan, letting oneself be carried away by the ink of emotion. I nodded, unable to articulate a word. The ink of emotion was staining all my defenses, my previous resolutions. The image of Marcos, of our life together, was becoming blurry, distant, like a memory from another existence. This place, Daniel continued, gesturing broadly to encompass the speakeasy, is a sanctuary for those stories. Here, masks fall away and desires whisper their truths. His voice was hypnotic. Desires. The word hung between us, charged. What were my desires? Did I even know them before tonight? Perhaps I just needed the right stage, the right company, for them to emerge from their slumber. And tell me, Clara, his voice became even softer, almost an auditory caress. What truths are your desires whispering to you tonight? He looked at me intently, waiting, as if he could read the answer in the flutter of my eyelashes. I leaned towards him, closing the little distance that separated us. They whisper to me, I began, my own voice an echo of his, that sometimes, the most interesting chapters are the ones we never thought we'd dare to write. His lips brushed mine, a touch as light as a butterfly's wing, yet it ignited every nerve ending in my body. Then, let's write, he murmured against my mouth, and the outside world, Marcos, the bookstore, everything disappeared. The kiss was slow at first, exploratory, like two souls recognizing each other in the dark. Then it deepened, charged with accumulated tension, with unexpressed desires. His hands moved to the nape of my neck, tangling in my hair. I clung to his shoulders, feeling the firmness of his muscles beneath the fabric of his jacket. He was an anchor in a storm of new and overwhelming sensations. The taste of his mouth, mixed with the exotic cocktail, was addictive. There was no rush, only the urgency of the present moment, of this encounter stolen from time, from routine. Every touch, every sigh, was a note in a forbidden melody that we both composed with guilty delight. When we separated, just enough to breathe, our foreheads remained joined. His hazel eyes looked at me with an intensity that made me feel like the only woman in the world. This, he began, his voice hoarse. Don't say anything, I interrupted him, placing a finger on his lips. Not yet. I don't want to analyze it, just feel it. Logic, reason, thoughts of Marcos, all that could wait. This moment was ours, sacred and profane at the same time. He smiled against my finger and then kissed it softly. As you wish, my intriguing bookseller. His hand slid down my arm, sending shivers in its wake, until it found mine again, lacing our fingers together naturally. We stayed like that for a while, in silence, listening to the bar's soft music and the beat of our own hearts. It was a new complicity, fragile yet incredibly powerful. I felt as if I had crossed an invisible bridge to another self. The waiter discreetly approached and refilled our glasses. Daniel thanked him with a nod. The normality of the act contrasted with the revolution I felt inside. How could the world keep spinning the same when everything in me had changed? What are you thinking about? Daniel asked, his voice pulling me from my reverie. His thumb was caressing the back of my hand, a constant reminder of his presence, of what had just happened. I looked at him. About the unexpected, I answered honestly. About how an ordinary day can turn into this. I made a vague gesture that encompassed both of us, the bar, the palpable magic in the air. Daniel smiled. Life is the best novelist. It always has a plot twist up its sleeve. He leaned in and gave me a short, sweet kiss on the lips, a delicious dessert after the previous feast. I knew the night couldn't last forever. Reality, with its schedules and responsibilities, awaited outside the velvet walls of the Crimson Quill. The thought of returning to it, to my life with Marcos, produced a strange tightness in my chest. I should go soon, I said regretfully, the sentence breaking the spell a little. Daniel nodded understandingly, without letting go of my hand. I know, but this story doesn't end here, does it? His words were a promise, an invitation to an uncertain but exciting future. No, I replied, my voice firm again. This feels more like the beginning of a new chapter. A very unexpected one. Daniel walked me to the nameless alley door. The cool New York night air hit me, bringing me abruptly back to reality. But it was a reality now tinged with the colors of the Crimson Quill, with the taste of his kiss. Until our paths cross again, Clara, he said, his voice a warm whisper in the night. There was no other kiss, it wasn't necessary. The promise was already made, hanging between us like the smoke of a clandestine cigarette. I walked away down the alley, feeling his gaze on my back. I didn't turn around. I wanted to preserve the image of his face in the gloom, the intensity of his eyes, the smile that promised more literary adventures, and others. On the way home, in the taxi, I touched my lips. I still felt the tingle of his kiss, the echo of his words. The city sped by the window, but my mind was anchored in a secret bar and a writer with penetrating eyes. I arrived home. Marcos was asleep on the sofa, the TV on with some mindless program. Normality, routine, but something in me had changed forever. The discreet bookseller had tasted improvisation. I turned off the TV and looked at Marcos for a moment. I loved him, in my own way. But the fire Daniel had lit in me was of a different nature, a bonfire threatening to consume the comfortable cabin of my life. That night, in my bed, I couldn't sleep. I relived every moment in the Crimson Quill, every word from Daniel, every touch. Was this infidelity? I hadn't crossed certain physical lines beyond the kiss, but my mind, my soul, those had already flown far away. The next morning, at the bookstore, everything seemed the same, but it wasn't. I wasn't the same. I looked at Daniel's books on the shelf with a new perspective. They were no longer just printed stories, they were a portal to a world I had tasted. The phone rang, startling me. My heart leapt. Could it be him? I picked up with a trembling hand. Nightingale Books? I asked, my professional voice hiding a whirlwind of expectations. It wasn't Daniel. It was a supplier. The disappointment was a small sting, but hope remained alive. He had said the story didn't end there. And I, for the first time in a long time, was eager to read the next chapter. Maybe Marcos would notice something. Maybe not. He was too absorbed in his own routine. But I was no longer just Clara, the bookseller. I was Clara, the one who had visited the Crimson Quill, the one who had kissed the writer of Echoes in the penumbra. The following days were a mix of normality and secret anticipation. Every time the phone rang, every time a customer remotely resembled him, my pulse quickened. I lived in a state of delightful alertness. One afternoon, a week later, while arranging some books, I found a small crimson feather tucked between the pages of a first edition. It wasn't from any known bird. It was the exact color of the velvet at the Crimson Quill. I smiled. No note, no message. Just that feather. A reminder. A sign. Daniel was a man of details, of symbols. And this was a very clear one. The story, indeed, would continue. I kept the feather in a secret drawer, next to the card with the cryptic address. They were the talismans of my new adventure, of my newly discovered self. The bookseller had found her own forbidden narrative. I didn't know when or how I would see Daniel again. But the certainty that it would happen was enough to fill my days with a special glow. Monotony had been broken, and in its place was a vibrant melody of possibilities. That night, I returned to the Crimson Quill. Alone. I needed to breathe that secret-laden air again, feel the caress of velvet, hear the whispers of other forbidden stories floating in the atmosphere. The doorman recognized me, a slight nod was enough. Inside, the atmosphere was the same, seductive and mysterious. I sat on our sofa, ordering the same exotic cocktail from the other night. I didn't expect to find Daniel. This visit was for me, to reconnect with that part of Clara that had awakened. To remind myself that life could be more than predictable pages, that sometimes, it was worth writing your own echoes in the penumbra. And as I savored my drink, I felt a presence beside me. I looked up. Daniel. With that half-smile that said it all. I thought you might need more ink for your story, he said, sitting down beside me. I smiled at him, my heart leaping with pure, unadulterated joy. Always, I replied. A writer never has enough ink. And I knew, without a doubt, that this chapter was just beginning to unfold its most lustrous charms.